This is Talk is Sheep, the official podcast of the Wild Sheep Society of BC, brought to you by Sitka Gear. Come along as we bring conversations that matter to you into the high alpine. This episode is sponsored by our conservation partner, Frontiersman Gear. Thank you, Sitka Gear and Frontiersman Gear, for investing in healthy wildlife and sustainable ecosystems. Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another fantastic episode of Talk is Sheep. Today is fantastic. I'm so excited. We've got Larry Weishuhn on the podcast. And Larry, you've been in the hunt space well before I was ever born. And I'm not calling you old, but I am. You've been doing it a long time. And I have so much respect for you. The things you've done, you probably don't know it, but 2 years ago at the Life Member Breakfast in Dallas Safari Club, it was when we were still back in Texas there in Dallas, and I got to sit at your table. I was two around, and I sat there and, kind of starstruck, I was sitting at Larry's table. I'm like, how lucky was that? And had a great breakfast and really enjoyed it and got to just listen to you. And I kind of was just a fly on the wall. So honored to be there at that breakfast and have you at the table. But welcome to the podcast, Larry. Fantastic to see you.
Thank you. It is truly an honor to be with you. I really appreciate what you guys are doing up in your part of the world. And as we all know, we're really kind of involved in this all together. So it is an honor to be on the podcast with you.
Well, wonderful. And that just makes me so happy when, this podcast starts off with we're in this together. And, there's so much work to be done in the conservation and the hunting, our hunting heritage space and protecting the things that we cherish so dearly. And when I hear people talk about we're all in this together, it really excites me. And Dallas Safari Club Foundation's been a generous supporter here up in British Columbia through various initiatives, certainly through the Wild Sheep Society BC. We'll talk a little bit about that in a bit. Yes, certainly sir. Dallas Safari Club, their advocacy work through the Guide Outfitters Association of BC and others as well. So, DSC, you've been closely involved with for decades now. But for our listeners, we've got Mr. Whitetail on the podcast. And I'll tell you, I look behind you in your office there and yeah, you're living up to your reputation, I must say.
Oh my goodness.
Wonderful. Really excited to have you on the podcast, Larry. Obviously a graduate from Texas A&M, decades of work in the wildlife biology realm. And of course, you're a celebrity without any doubt. So much work done in our hunt space. Campfire Talk with yourself, Larry Weishuhn. Love DSC Campfires, the great work that you're doing there with that podcast. And of course, some of the things I want to dive in today, talk about the great work as a founder of the Texas Wildlife Association. I think you just said 40 years. So yes, anything that's 40 years old in the conservation and hunting space is just amazing because it's a hard place to live. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. As I said, I'm so honored to be here. And I had an opportunity to have you on the podcast here not very long ago as well. So that's coming up on DSC's Campfires with Larry Weishuhn. And we got a chance to talk a little bit about some of the sheep work that's being done and the habitat work being done up in British Columbia, which is so very important. We talked about so very often, when I get an opportunity, I talk about butterflies because I have found that most people, whether they're hunters, anti-hunters, in between, they all love butterflies, and that gives me an opportunity to talk about when you have a really good habitat with a variety of vegetation, you have a variety of species there, and in those situations, butterflies do good. And it allows me to talk about how important hunting is in terms of dollars for conservation, but also in keeping that habitat as healthy as it can possibly be and be good for a lot of different species as well.
That's so much wisdom there, Larry. And I'm hoping to learn from you today with your 6 decades of experience in the conservation world about the things the evolution that you've seen. And, we see these peaks and valleys and the challenges we go through with, wildlife populations and then just the support for the hunting community by the general public or lack thereof. And you've kind of been through all those peaks and valleys. And I want to learn from you today about what you've seen over the years and where we're at today. Are we in a, lots of times if you listen to the media or you look outside or you talk to some people, you start thinking, oh my goodness, the sky's falling. But, you've been doing it for long enough to see that Yeah, there's some pretty high points and there's some low points in there too. And so I'd love to dive into that today, just from your perspective, as a biologist and a hunter, kind of your experience throughout your career, I guess.
As a youngster, I grew up out in the country with a mom and dad that loved to hunt. My dad didn't care much about fishing, but I had a granddad, a maternal granddad, who would come by every morning before he went to work. He was a county commissioner in charge of the roads in that area. And during the time when it was not cold and hunting season going on, we would dig worms and go fishing. And then, of course, when the hunting season rolled around, even though back then we did not have very many deer, but we hunted squirrels and those kind of things. And quite frankly, I lived outdoors, much to the chagrin, I'm sure, of my mom and dad, because whenever anything was going on, I'd disappear back into the trees that we had back not very far behind our house, kind of thing. And so I grew up in those kind of situations with somebody who truly loved the outdoors, had a great respect for the animals that were there. We were in the chicken business, hog business, cattle business. My dad loved horses. He ran hounds as much as he could, every opportunity that he could with that, and beagles on a Sunday afternoon. So I got to see those early years when uh, lots of people hunted. Most of the people in our community hunted. Now, we didn't have a whole lot of game in terms of deer. If you even saw a deer track, you were talked about for a while. You talked about it. If you saw a deer, oh my gracious, if you happened to take a deer, it was just, you were the hero for the year until the next hunting season kind of rolled around. So we saw some of that where everybody was kind of involved and starting to learn a lot about how habitat was important, how game management was starting. Really, it was not in its infancy because it had progressed beyond that stage, but a lot of the things that we were to learn later on, particularly dealing with habitat and game species, we learned in those years after I was a little bit of almost a grown kid kind of thing. With our Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, I actually was very fortunate that I got to go to work under contract with the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department and the Department of Veterinary Pathology at Texas A&M University doing wildlife disease research. And it was during those early years back in the late 60s and early 70s that I was very much involved for a while there with the Desert Bighorn program as well too. But during those years, we learned so much, and we learned that we needed to, where we had private lands, we needed to get the private landowners involved, and where we had public land, we needed to, in certain instances, educate those people who were taking care of the public land, who were sometimes a little bit tunnel vision in terms of maybe only for forest or only for this or only for that. And very early in my career, I learned there's such a thing as preservation and conservation. And I learned
Mm.
very quickly where you try to preserve one individual thing, such as grizzly bears in British Columbia, wolves in certain areas of our state. When you try to preserve those, you create death in a lot of different species. So to me, when you talk about preservation, preservation promotes death. Conservation is the wise use of. So conservation provides and promotes life, because when you, going back to what kind of we talked about a little bit earlier, if you make sure that there's a sound habitat on a daily basis, not just a seasonal basis, then all wildlife benefits. So those are some of the things that we learned really kind of going through those early years, and then learned a lot about herd management. In the instance of whitetail deer, we had a thing called screwworm flies that really, and we're facing those right now coming out of Mexico once again. We were able to control those by realizing that a female screwworm fly only bred one time. So they went in and sterilized billions of flies, of males. They breed one time, so essentially they kind of bred themselves out of existence, except for in the very lower end of Mexico. Now they're starting to come back up again this way. So we've got a little bit of a problem there that we're facing there, but our government thankfully has seen the light and is starting to put money into that program, because those things can affect everything from humans on down, any warm-blooded animal. But once we got past that, our deer population started greatly expanding to where we went from where we had very few deer to too many deer. And it was a hard sell to begin with to get landowners and hunters to take any female whitetail deer. what do you mean we're going to shoot the cows? We're not going to have any calves when we shoot the cows. Well, we I can remember when we first started in some of the South Texas brush country. The first one or two does that were killed, the local populace, I thought they were going to hang the guys that shot those couple of does. To where now we take as many female or antlerless deer in these areas as we do bucks. All that was kind of learned over a period of time. We learned so much about nutrition. We learned so much about the importance of good management for a lot of different things. And it's a continually changing habitat, and populations are very dynamic. So you have to learn how to adapt certain things. And we went from those kind of situations again to where we had so many hunters. I mean, gosh, our schools would shut down for opening day of hunting season. People would show up by the hundreds in the little rural communities that we lived in, to where then it became a little bit of a not so much in vogue as it used to be. We went from along the way from thinking very much in terms of quality, primarily a lot of times in terms of antlers, and in some instances because of that, we reduced to some extent the hunter population a little bit because dollars were tight and hunting cost. And so, but now it seems like we're headed back in a little bit of a different direction as well, too. So I'm tickled to see that. It's been very interesting watching attitudes in managers. I'm talking about wildlife biologists and game wardens and landowners and land managers, whether they work for a public entity or a private entity, how some of their attitudes have changed as we've learned more about wild species and the habitat that they live in.
Oh, wow. There's a lot to unpack there, Larry. Oh, my goodness. 60 years of great knowledge there. And so, you talked about those early days and not seeing much on the landscape. And, if you've seen tracks, it was you were excited. So I guess that screwworm issue was resolved. And so where are we kind of at today? Is Texas pretty stable? Are we looking pretty healthy on the wildlife populations? And I know you're real struggling over there with some bighorn sheep, and we don't need to dive down that, although we can. But what are your wildlife populations looking like in Texas for the most part? And let's hit on whitetail deer. They don't call you Mr. Whitetail for nothing, so we might as well take advantage of you while we have you here now, Larry.
Well, that moniker is thanks to J. Wayne Piers, who's a dear friend of mine, wildlife biologist, a writer from I think about 1984 and 1987. He did a magazine article in which he called me Mr. Whitetail, so it goes back a long way. The whitetail thing, where we are today, is we have learned so very much in the last many years about managing deer in terms of habitat, in terms of age, in terms of antlers. We've seen a shift, and it looks like we may be heading away from it right now, where there was so much emphasis put on deer. We're here in Texas. We had a lot of deer breeders. Some of those were very legitimate. I mean, they were doing it for the right reasons. And then there were some that, unfortunately, we just had a huge case that was broken where there, I think, like 1,200 charges going to be filed against somebody because they were capturing deer and moving them illegally, essentially. And so we went to those really big antlers, and I used to get calls from people saying, well, man, where can I kill a 200 plus deer? And most of the time they were talking about breeder deer. And I don't include those in high fences because they're pens and then they're high fences. Some of our high fences are 20, 30,000 acres in size. Mm-hmm. So that deer never realizes there's any kind of obstacle there for them. But we saw that happening. Now I'm getting people calling me saying, where can I go shoot a really nice, good, mature whitetail deer that is not genetically produced or something like that? So from that respect, I'm really tickled to see or hear what I'm seeing or see what I'm hearing, kind of thing. From a population perspective, we do have some issues in the state, but as a whole, our deer population is pretty darn stable. We've got you got to realize too, about 95 to 98% of our state of Texas is privately owned. And it's the landowner and those individuals who he decides he wants to listen to who make the final decision on a lot of different things. As we brought up the economic value of whitetail deer, all of a sudden, a lot of these places now they take serious consideration as to the requirements of what a deer needs on a day-to-day basis, on a year-round basis as well too. And so because of that, I think our deer population as a whole, talking about whitetail deer and to some extent mule deer, is pretty darn stable because people have become very, very interested in terms of making sure that that animal is a healthy animal and that that habitat is healthy. So from that perspective, I feel very encouraged of what we're seeing and what I've seen just in the last few years.
Very good. How is the situation with CWD? Do you guys have any issues with chronic wasting disease in Texas, or are you guys doing all right there?
We've had some problems with CWD, and we're still having some problems with it because of some of the deer movement that occurred, and some of it that was legally done before they really knew what was going on, and then some of it we come to find out was illegally done as well too. So we do a lot of monitoring on whitetail deer across the state. We've got check stations set up. There are areas where essentially every deer that comes out of that area needs to be tested. We've got some areas too where those animals actually the hunter has the option as to whether or not to have it tested. And same thing with the landowners. The CWD thing is an interesting thing as far as I'm concerned. I think there's some things that were done properly, and I think there's some things that were done maybe out of hysteria more than anything else. It's one of those diseases that mostly affects some of the older animals, kind of thing. I think it's fairly prevalent in certain areas. It's an interesting disease. It really is, and it is true disease. There's no vaccination program. It's a prion, so it exists except for under very harsh conditions, I guess, and in terms of extremely possible heat or those kind of things, or some kind of a disinfectant. I used to get tickled because I'd ask the veterinarians that worked with it, and I says, "What do you do to keep from spreading this with your instruments?" I said, "You're doing necropsies, and then you're taking those." Well, we sterilize them with a bleach. I said, "The bleach kills it," and he goes, "Well, the bleach kills it on the instruments. So there's no way we can insert bleach into the animals and expect them to survive." But so we're learning all the time. There's all kinds of efforts around, including that there's some people who seem to think that they can come up with a deer that is produced in a pen situation that it at least is maybe resistant, if not immune to those kind of things. So, there's lots of different things going on. We'll see what the future brings. I'm concerned about it, of course, as a biologist and as a landowner. I have a small piece of property and I also lease country and hunt a lot in Texas. So I'm concerned of it from that respect, and continually trying to learn what I can, and try to find ways where we can keep the spread of that particular disease to a very minimum.
Awesome. Larry, I know you've hunted all around the world, and you've kind of seen, and you talked about it briefly there about the value of wildlife. When wildlife is valued, it becomes abundant because people, so maybe let's touch a little bit on your perspective on that. And keep in mind when you're talking about the North American wildlife management model. So it's been very successful in North America, but you've hunted Africa. You understand. And in Texas, there's a lot more, like you said, private land than there is public land. So it's a little bit. I wouldn't say it's a play on the North American wildlife model, but it's a little bit different in Texas than the rest of public hunting in other states, for example. So I'd love to hear your perspective on the value of wildlife and why that's so critical to their abundance.
I will start here in Texas and go to Africa, if you will.
Okay, that sounds great.
Here in Texas, for the longest time, years ago, deer were just kind of looked upon as kind of maggots on the range, if you will, in a lot of different areas. And then as the value of those animals increased because of people's interest in hunting and in leasing here, all of a sudden the landowner goes, "Well, I'm going to rotate cattle, and I'll maybe that bring some vegetation on for the deer, and rather than shut off all the water in those pastures while we pull the cattle out, I'll just leave some water." So when that happened, just those kind of things, and those kind of things also happen throughout a lot of the West where they do rotational type things of grazing, and to where all of a sudden now there was water, there was an income that was coming in. Here in Texas, we went through some really bad years ago in terms of drought and livestock prices being very low. And frankly, had it not been for the leasing part of it, the value of wildlife on the properties that the landowner had, they'd probably lost their properties because they couldn't have paid their taxes. So when they realized the importance of the economic value here, all of a sudden they started taking care of the animals. They started taking into consideration the requirements of habitat and cover and water and all those things. Having hunted in Africa in certain areas, I can tell you if you're interested in elephants, and I love to talk to people about elephants, I'll wear my DSC shirt on a plane or wherever I can, so they can see the DSC elephant and start asking questions. But and if you look at elephants in Africa, the only place where there are any appreciable number of elephants is where they're hunted. Because if it's not for that, we're very quick here in the U.S. in certain communities, most of the time very urban communities. Same thing in Europe, to where they really don't quite understand what happens say, in Africa. Those folks live on hardly anything to eat. A lot of times, I've been in areas where they had a little garden that was not a whole lot bigger than your office or my office, and they had to survive on that garden. They had to walk 2 miles to go get water. Their homes were really kind of sticks and mud. Well, when an elephant came through and ate your garden, knocked your house over, maybe stepped on one of your children or one of your relatives, and destroyed the water well, you'd have a different look at or a different way of looking at that animal than the guy who goes, oh my gosh, they're really pretty, and oh, we need so many elephants and all that. And so were it not for the fact of hunting in those areas where dollars are brought in for the hunting of those elephants, those folks would go in and by whatever means they had would kill every elephant that's there, whether it's through a gun or primarily through poisoning water holes, which affects every animal that's there. So as we've increased the value of that animal from their perspective by providing jobs, providing food. I've hunted elephants in Namibia. The only reason was, of course, I wanted to hunt elephants, but the primary reason was to shoot elephants for what they call own use, where the village gets every bit of meat there is on those elephants, and you get or me in this instance, I got a photograph kind of thing. We've learned in so many different other places, there are parts of Asia where for years the wild sheep were looked at as, my gosh, they're competing with sheep and goats, our domestic sheep and goats. And a lot of those areas, they were just about shot out. Well, now with hunting, because hunters coming in and paying dollars that create jobs, create all kinds of things, those sheep populations in a lot of the areas are starting to flourish once again. So it all comes right back down. It's as much as you hate to think in that term, but as long as there is wildlife or the value has any wildlife, there's going to be care for them in terms of habitat, in terms of space. We're running shorter on space all the time as human population increases and that necessity to produce food for those. So then it becomes even ever more important to properly manage the habitat that remains and to properly manage that wild herd that's there so they don't eat themselves out of house and home. Animals can repopulate pretty darn quickly. In a lot of these areas, habitat is so critical that it may take to bring the habitat back to where it was when there were a decent amount of animals to where there were too many, to bring it back to that where there were a decent amount of animals. That can be generations. And our generation, we're talking hundreds, a couple of 100 years in some instances. So that to me just makes it all that more important for us to be proper conservations, if you will, conservation, going back to that wise use kind of thing. And again, that brings it back to the fact that we're all in this together.
Well said. I want to just explore a little bit, Larry. As hunters, we say hunting is conservation, and that
Yes.
that we all know that's falls on pretty deaf ears with the general public as a general rule, because it's just a one-liner. And we all know that the hunting story is complicated. There's no easy one-liner. But how
Yeah.
come, we're so passionate about conservation and hunting and our heritage and what we've grown up to love? And we've got these organizations, these powerhouses like Dallas Safari Club, Wild Sheep Foundation, Safari Club International. The list is long with lots of resources, and yet we can't make an argument to sort of the general public. There's just this, we're easily vilified. What's the silver bullet? What's the trick there? And I know there's a lot of things to think about there, but I feel like as a community, we have a real hard time telling that story. I guess maybe because it's complicated, but where have we kind of gone wrong? And I've seen a lot of what you're doing, and it inspires me. So I'd love to hear your perspective on what you think maybe where we went wrong, or maybe what we need to do a little bit differently to sort of garner that support. Because I think that we're on the side of truth, and we have proof. We can proof what we do if we could only get the message out. But man, we have a hard time doing that.
I think part of it comes down to, there used to be a cartoon in the Sunday papers called Opus. Opus was an opossum, and he lived in the swamp along with the alligators and all these kind of things. And there were several things going on. And the one that I remember as much as anything, and I used to have it cut out and on my desk, where Opus makes this sound statement. He says, "I have seen the enemy, and it is us." And we have so many great organizations, and unfortunately within those organizations, there, don't make some people mad saying this, they're egos. And
Yeah.
in some instances, we do not have a unified front. It came down to, I got tickled years ago. I bow hunted in the past. Years ago, I shot my last arrow bow in 1984. If somebody wants to know, but to me, there was a time when the bare bow recurve type hunters hated the wheel bow hunters, and the wheel bow hunters hated, and the dog hated this group, and the dog hunters didn't get along with the hunters who didn't hunt with dogs. We've all got our own little facets that we go after, and we're missing the boat by not creating a true unified front. The more we can bring organizations together with a unified message, I think that is a big part of it. The other thing is, it does come down to education. Education starts at the young, but we can't forget about the old as well too. You get right down to it, a lot of the states now have their wildlife programs are ruled by general public when you get down to it, and the antis have done a great job of convincing people that that hunting is in some instances bad. Yet that's not true. That's not true. We deal all the time with a media that is, for some reason, doesn't want to tell the truth. In some instances, particularly regarding with how important wildlife is, or even fire is. We have to realize that we've talked about that a little bit in the past, where you're doing some fantastic controlled burns up in the high country, and it's greatly increased the food. Well, a lot of the areas too, burning has been such that, oh my God, if there's a fire, we got to put it out, rather than in some instances letting it burn and letting that habitat recoup to where it produces food at a level that animals can reach. We do not have very many wild giraffes living in our national forest, where the basic only food is at the tops of the trees in a lot of instances. So logging can be a part of that, but also again, it comes down to that wise use of. But I think the biggest problems that we face is just simply creating a unified front of going, guys, this is how we're going to approach this, and that needs to include anybody that loves the outdoors, that partakes of it, and even the photographers type. They're taking as well too, and you get right down to it, or they should be thanking the hunter that the hunter has kept that population in check, so there's habitat, so that there's songbirds and they're this kind of predator and there's that kind of predator. So to me, it's bringing everybody together where we can. There's some really good efforts that have been created along those lines. We just need to continue doing more of that. And then once we do, then creating a true unified message to where we're all on the same page. Yeah, we've got our differences. Let's take care of those differences in a back room where we have the doors shut. And then when we come out, we all have the same smile on our face with the same message.
Man, that's inspiring, Larry, and absolutely, I think you're spot on there. And yeah, it's and we're just seeing it. It's interesting. Like we've seen this auction permit issue crop up now, and it's a pretty divisive one for. I'd say it's one of the bigger, more divisive ones in our community right now. That there's just sort of this disconnect there between people that just are not super keen on the permit, and then there's others that obviously are. See the value and the benefit of it and the great
Right.
work that it's doing, right? So,
Again, it comes down to common sense knowledge, common sense. And so very often I love to tell people, I've seen the human population go up at a very steep angle. And as that population angle goes up, the amount of common sense in that population is a commensurate downfall going back the other way. And unfortunately, it's also kind of like all this. A lot of times it's like a pendulum. We swing from one side to the
mm,
other side. It's that when that pendulum is hanging down kind of toward the middle and maybe a few degrees to the left, a few degrees to the right, that's when things are proper. And that, you can even with predators, it's the same thing. There are times when we have way too many predators. There are probably times when we haven't had enough predators, when the human population can manage that population properly. And so, the predators stepped in and managed it very harshly because Mother Nature is not a kind mother. She is a
mhm.
very harsh mother if left to her own devices.
Yeah, well said. Lots we could go into. I could see this podcast could literally go for 4 hours. So, one thing I want to touch on, it's kind of in the same vein, but I've heard you talk about this before and write about it. You talk a little bit about that rural urban divide and sort of
Yes.
how that's kind of influencing modern conservation and sort of attitudes towards hunting. So maybe just touch a little bit on that one before we sort of jump on to the next topic here, Larry.
Absolutely. When I was growing up, everybody had a connection to the land. Even the folks that lived in downtown Houston, their families were from the land. They had a better understanding about what real life really truly was, as opposed to their little small area that they lived in, where food came from the grocery store and water came out of the pipes and those kind of things. The disconnect in a lot of places has come is as we've increased that human population and thankfully, in some instances, thankfully into a smaller area so that we can somewhat negate them getting into some of the other areas and building homes and all those other kind of things. But there has been a disconnect. We are now 3 or 4 generations away from people who have spent time on a farm or anything of that nature. I like to talk about COVID. COVID was a horrible thing. But COVID, among other things, brought a lot of people to the fact that, hey, my food, it comes from the grocery store? Okay, there's nothing in the grocery store,
Yeah.
or the lines were long and so I think it brought a lot of people back to a little bit of an understanding that, hey, food doesn't just come from the grocery store, it's got to come from somewhere else. Along those lines, too, at the same time, we're seeing a big movement as far as the people wanting to create their own food, to go out and to harvest their own food, whether it's from a garden or from a stream or, from the field as far as hunting is concerned. And I think that part of COVID really made a difference to where now we're starting to look at things a little bit differently. I mean, it's swinging back the other way a little bit again now, but there is that disconnect between the people that live right in the heart of town, never leave. Their entire life is built around a few city blocks, as opposed to those folks who uh, maybe live on the edge of town a little bit. At least they're seeing birds and they have an understanding why they're birds, and then the people that live out in the country that have to deal sometimes with overpopulations of particular species and who deal with the management side of things. I love to tell people though that if you live in town and you live in a high-rise apartment and you're on the 14th floor and you've got this little cubby hole where you can step out onto what people there call a porch, and you love flowers. So you plant 3 or 4 pots of flowers. When you do that, you become a wildlife influencer because you're potentially providing food for insects, which provide food for birds, and it does a lot of good things for there in the process as well too. So I think sometimes we forget that we need to also include those folks into. Uh, they're going to be a whole lot easier to educate if they got a plant in the back and they know that plant needs water and they know that that plant needs fertilizer. That opens the door to a lot of good conversations to try to even out things across the urban and the rural areas, if you will, in terms of people.
Well said. Awesome. So I've heard you talk lots about legacy, and I know you're incredibly passionate about youth. And as the co-founder of the Texas Wildlife Association, I'd like to hear a little bit about that next generation youth, and then how that sort of translates into a legacy for the future of the things that are important to us: conservation, hunting, and wildlife.
We're very fortunate here in Texas in several respects in that we do have, like the Texas Wildlife Association, we have a youth hunting program which requires a youth to bring a parent or guardian. Over the last several years, we're right at about 40,000 kids that we've introduced to hunting. And when you do that, you've introduced a lot of times the parent and guardian to it as well. And the beauty of that is a lot of those parents or guardians, and more so probably the guardians, our parents have been women. And so the women all of a sudden realize, hey, this is fun. It's a great way for me to provide food for the family. So it kind of creates that legacy in itself. We also, through the Texas Wildlife Association, provide teaching material to a tremendous number of teachers. And I think our reach just in the last 2 or 3 years now has been like through some of those things that we do with teachers in public schools, we've reached something well over 1 million kids. And doing field days a lot of times too, and bringing them in the field and letting them actually touch grass and letting them actually, see a bird and those kind of things as well too. Then there's it used to be the Dallas Ecological Society's called Outdoor Tomorrow program that actually has situations set up, courses that they teach in school where it is a class, an approved class in school systems. And that's pretty much across across the USA. We've got some of those, I think, as far north as in Washington State right now, and all the way up to Maine, and then all the way through. So, when you look at those kind of things, there's still some battles that we fight. And a lot of it has to do with the battles. To me, we may have to figure out a way to spend more time with a program that you can look at on a game that you play on a phone, because these days people spend so much time there, particularly kids. And so maybe we need to look at those kind of things and trying to figure out ways to entice them to come outdoors. But as a whole, in going to some of the conventions that I've gone to, particularly with DSC and some of the others, it is so refreshing in so many ways to when Saturday comes around and there are no classes, the parents that you see with their small kids, is it enough of them? Probably no, but it's that start, and it kind of seems to grow every year when I go to one of the DSC conventions, particularly because it's open to the public. You don't need to be a member to be there, and the prices to get in, the admission, are relatively inexpensive compared to a lot of other things. And there's so many things for kids to see, and we try to cater that to some extent as well too. So when I look at it from all those kind of perspectives, am I concerned about the future? Absolutely. I'd be a fool if I wasn't. But at the same time, there are these little glimmers of hope that keep cropping up. And the more that we can get back to what I talked about a while ago, the more that we can get more organizations on the same page with a very definitive message that we can provide to the youth, but also their parents and their grandparents. And I think if we can do that, then that future becomes even better going into the future.
Awesome. Um, you touched base on a little bit there about the women. So you mentioned it.
Yes.
How important is that to sort of on R3 and sort of getting that interest from that demographic? And I feel like COVID sort of opened the eyes of a lot of people, and it's sort of you know, and I think women are always. They're always thinking way ahead, more so than a guy like myself. They're in tune with it, and they kind of seen right away, like, oh man, there's probably some flaws in our system here. And but anyway, I'd love to hear your perspective on women and attracting them to the world of hunting and conservation.
Interestingly, in our little community that I grew up, a little community called Zimmerzeit, about 90% of the women that were there hunted. So it wasn't until I got to be a little bit older that I realized that there weren't that many women hunters. I thought it was just a natural thing for women to hunt and fish kind of thing. To me, in a utopian world, half the hunting license would be sold to men, the other half would be sold to women. Thankfully, through the efforts of Miss Renee, Ray Thornton's wife, with Women Hunt, some of the programs that have been done through the Wild Turkey Federation and numerous others, there have been a lot more women introduced into hunting. Frankly, I'd much rather hunt with a woman than I would a man. I tell people all the time, I said, they're much more attractive to look at, they smell better, and they're deadly. The human woman or the human female is a deadly killer when you get right down to it. They don't get excited, they listen very well. But to me, it's so very important that we really go after more and more women to get into the outdoors. And I think because of the fact that they have most of them prepare food for their families, so they have a better understanding about food and wanting to have food that is healthy for their families. And with that being the case, as we continually work in that direction, we get more and more women involved. Again, going back to the Texas Wildlife Association, and there's other organizations as well too, but we have an adult hunter program where every year we've been increasing the number of people. We're fortunate, going back again to the fact that Texas is a private land state. We do have managed land permits. A lot of those properties need to remove a great number of deer or each year to maintain the population for the habitat that they have. So that has allowed us through the youth hunting program that we have, but also through our adult program to take more and more women on outdoors to learn how to hunt and to not only learn how to hunt, but we also in those courses, if you will, we talk about wildlife management. We talk about how to properly prepare the game, how to field dress it rather, and then how to properly prepare it so that it becomes an absolutely great meal to put it in front of the people that are around her. So women in the outdoors, absolutely anything that we can do and come up with, I think we need to be doing so.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I remember someone saying like a lot of women are inclined to take their children. Not that dads aren't willing to do that either. That clearly happens, but it's usually when the woman's involved, the whole family's involved. Sometimes when dad's involved, it might just be dad.
You're right. And the thing about it is hopefully this was a trend that reverses, but here in the States, we went through a tremendous a high divorce rate.
Mm,
And so very often the children stayed with the mom, and the mom's
right.
going, "Oh my God, what can I do that produces quality time?" Well, there is no better quality time spent with a child than sitting in a deer blind or behind a log looking for a deer and having that opportunity to take a deer, but also to see all the other things that occur while you're out there to really enjoy nature. And it really kind of creates a bond between mom and those children, whether it's a daughter or whether it's a son, either way.
Awesome. Now you mentioned Women Hunt and Renee. Did you go? I thought I seen you down at FTW during one of the Women Hunt courses, doing some work down there. Is that true in the second year or first year or something?
It was really kind of the first year that we decided, or that she
Uh,
decided to do that there on the FTW ranch. Of course, Tim Fallon has been a dear friend for a long, long time. Tim and I have hunted all over the world and gotten into all kinds of situations and thankfully out of them as well too. But yes, we put together initially on the FTW really a program for first time hunters to where
wow.
we did everything from basic gun safety to basic gun knowledge to optics to ballistics to the habits of the animals to shot placement to just the list goes on how to properly take the innards out of that animal that you take, how to take the skin off, how to cape it if you're interested in trying to cape it for a mount, how to cut that animal up. And then the final thing is for the most part, we brought Joshua Schwenka, who's now very much involved as well, too, with the Wild Sheep Foundation to show people how to properly prepare venison. That went, yes, sir. So I was there on the first couple of those, and now they've got that thing locked in so good that I don't need to be there, frankly.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, fantastic. Okay, so we're just going to segue a little bit off of sort of recruitment and sort of the youth stuff. Was there anything else on Texas Wildlife Association that we want to touch on, Larry, before
No,
we
I
move
think
on?
that pretty much covers it. I'd love for people to go see what all is there, and they can do that by going to the website, which is texas-wildlife.org kind of thing. And we can get those later on in the show notes as well, too. But I think if they'll go there, that organization really has also served as an example in a lot of other states as well, too, or portions of it. So it's a great fountain of knowledge. As you mentioned, we've been able to stay around 40 years. We're in pretty darn good shape financially and all those kind of things. So hopefully there'll be another at least 40 years for that one. But they can learn more about it just by going to the website, and I'd highly encourage them to do so because I think they'll be very pleased as to what they see and probably get some ideas as well to what they might be able to do in their own community.
Awesome. Okay, that sounds great. Well, I appreciate that. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the great work that the conservation orgs that you support, and you've been so involved with Dallas Safari Club, Dallas Safari Club Foundation, a great partner here in British Columbia. You guys have been generous in supporting the conservation work that we're doing. I did have the honor of presenting. I think it was it August 8th that you and I chatted. We presented. It was the granting reporting day with Dallas Safari Club Foundation. It was a real honor and privilege to share the work that we're doing and our request for 2026 and just to hopefully to continue to work with the foundation. But Dallas Safari Club Foundation has been a donor for the last number of years and been very involved with our programs here in British Columbia. So I know you're super passionate about the great work that DSC does. So let's just chat a little bit about that great organization now, Larry.
Yes, sir. DSC's been around now. Gosh, I think it started more or less officially in about 1982 or somewhere along through there. I've personally been involved in one form or fashion since 1987. And to me, it is an organization that primarily of volunteers, if you get right down to it, people who are very passionate about wildlife, very passionate about wildlife conservation, and making sure that the future generations have at least some of the opportunities that we've had. It is a worldwide organization, as you well know. We, about 7 or 8 years ago, maybe somewhere along through there, started chapters, and we have chapters pretty much growing at a rapid rate across the face of the U.S. and hopefully before too very long in Canada and Mexico and a few other places as well. And what really sets the chapters apart, and what I'm so very proud of the fact that if you're a DSC chapter, you're your own 501(c) tax exempt organization, if you will. When it comes to having banquets, I challenge any other organization out there to do what DSC does. If your top fundraiser, if you're a chapter and your top fundraiser, whatever amount of money you net, you get to keep 75% of it up front to do with and grant as you wish for that local chapter, be it locally, be it nationally, internationally, however. 20% of that goes to the DSC Foundation. And what's interesting there, that 20%, that local chapter still pretty much dictates where that 20% goes. It just simply comes out of the DSC Foundation. 5% goes to the DSC organization, and that's to support Mike Hofstadter, who is one of our guys who goes around to help set up chapters and maintain chapters, and then Bruce Borowski, who is our first guy to do that. And those two guys have done just a phenomenal job. But the beauty of it is compared to any other organization that essentially you get to keep 95% or you dictate where 95% of your funds go. So that's something that I'm very proud of in terms of DSC. And like I said, I've been involved in all kinds of organizations. I don't know of any other organizations, no matter what their background is, that does those kind of things. So the granting arm of DSC is the DSC Foundation. It was started several years ago, and I wasn't on the board initially, but I was on the board quite not very long after that. And one of the things that we wanted to do with the DSC Foundation is to not only create it as its own entity as it was, but also to create our own funds. And that led us to having the annual DSC gala that we have in July every year. And then too, we work with different organizations to try to procure other grants. If any organization, individual, company, or any entity, when you get right down to it, if they're really involved in wildlife conservation to an extent, education, if they're interested in trying to procure a grant from the DSC Foundation, they can simply go to the DSC Foundation website, which is dscf.org, and there's a place there where they can apply for grants. And as we now have our website getting stronger all the time, we have it back in our own hands, which is a long story, but which now we're showing what people, where those dollars actually go to across the board. About, I'm guessing right now, probably this year, probably 60% or better will be maintained. The funds will go to here in North America. There's some that'll go to Africa. There's a couple of projects we're doing are being funded in some of the Asian countries as well too. But actually, the vast majority of the dollars, when you get right down to it, at least the majority of the dollars are spent on projects such as what y'all are doing with the Wild Sheep Society in British Columbia. We do a lot of things with the Mule Deer Foundation where we can jointly do things to where they come up with some dollars and we come up with some dollars. And guess what? When you do that, then there's a fair number of dollars that can be spent for the research that needs to be done, or the research, put those research practices that I've learned into real life practices as well too. So, to me, anybody that loves the outdoors needs to be a member of DSC. I get tickled because sometimes I'll be somewhere and, they see the elephant and they go, "Oh my God, it's only Africa." And they said, "Oh, what does DSC stand for?" And I said, actually, when you get right down to it, it stands for the Dallas Squirrel Hunters Association. I said, because all of us love the outdoors. I said, yes, there's some who have been fortunate to have traveled internationally and because of that, become very aware of how management occurs and how conservation occurs, and it allows us to maybe implement practices that work there, or implement practices that work here as well too. But to me, anybody that loves the outdoors needs to really be involved with DSC. And we've got a new program now, and I'm drawing a blank that we have set up so that it's a new group, if you will, within the organization that provides dollars to individuals who were hurt while in the field dealing with wildlife. I kick myself for not remembering because I don't have it here on my desk right now as I normally do. But they can learn more about that too by going to the DSC website or the DSC Foundation website.
Oh, that's fantastic. So is that for somebody that's maybe a guide that's in the community and gets injured on a hunt or something like that, or how does that work? It
can be that, and we actually we did have another foundation set up that was similar to this one. This one expanded it a little bit more so that we can help people a little bit better and a little bit more who are primarily involved in the hunting wildlife side of thing or the wildlife conservation thing, to where we can provide dollars there now as opposed to what we had in the past.
Awesome. What a great program. And just, before we sort of start wrapping up here, on behalf of the society, our board and our members, this opportunity to partner with the foundation, Dallas Safari Club Foundation, we're very grateful. And there's a lot of heavy lifting being done in the north on these prescribed burns that are directly benefiting stone sheep, and seeing increased numbers of stone sheep, without question. We've got it well documented, and we could not do it with the support of Dallas Safari Club Foundation and our other partners. So, just from the bottom of my heart, Larry, to you and everyone at DSC and the foundation, we're so grateful that we have this partnership and this opportunity to work together. So.
To turn that around to you, we're so grateful for you that you do the job that y'all do. That makes us trying to come up with money to grant money to y'all that much more important and that much more heartfelt when you get right down to it, because we know those dollars are going to something that is truly worthwhile, and those practices are really doing something that really helps wildlife. And that's one of the things we get lots of requests. All of our requests are so extremely well vetted by professionals. We're fortunate. We've got a great board. We've got a small board, and there are like 7 people on the board. We've got a couple of advisors, myself and Erica Gonzalez, who kind of brings in a little bit of something from not a little bit of something, brings in a lot from her experience with the various chapters. But all those things are so very well vetted. Y'all send in reports. We know that it happens, and people that can contribute to in so many different ways. There are individual ways to contribute. Again, we'd always love to have more money like everybody else does.
Yes.
The good thing about DSC Foundation is we're simply the pass through. I mean, none of us that are involved there are receiving any kind of paychecks. We don't receive even expenses for when we're gone for couple 3 days at a time each month in Dallas or anything like that. All that comes out of the individual directors and our couple of advisors' pockets. So there's nobody getting money. The money comes in, it goes right back out again. We just simply try to direct it to make sure that it goes to those who are such as yourselves who are doing the job and getting it done.
Well, that's great, and my hat's off to you as an advisor and your team and the directors. And it's the quiet work of the conservationists, right? It's just It's what we do. We don't make a big deal about it. We quietly look after wildlife because we care, and it's phenomenal. So okay, I know I've taken a bunch of your time, but
no, you haven't. I'm enjoying every moment of it. My gracious.
You generously hosted me on your podcast, and at the end of it, you asked me for my favorite hunting story. So I would be absolutely remiss if I didn't get your favorite hunting story, because I know you've got a resume literally a mile long, but I'd love to hear your favorite hunting story, Larry.
There's so many. It probably comes right back down to, and it's hard to narrow things down, but it probably comes down to hunting with my daughters. I've got 2 daughters, Teresa and Beth. They started shooting BB guns when they were tiny, kind of thing, and finally got them up to about 8 years or so of age, and I'm sitting there. I found out, and particularly when they got to be a little bit older, but I found out everything that Mom did not really want them to have. Different type of cookies, different types of chips, soft drinks. So I would store all these up, and we would go sit behind a stump or against a stump somewhere. And I can remember I wanted them to take their first deer. They shot both their first deer when they were like 8 years old with a 270 Winchester that I'd cut the stock down to fit them a little bit. And we're sitting there and we're seeing deer, and I really want them to start off with either a doe or a really small buck. And you're seeing everything that you're not supposed to be seeing. All the big bucks are showing up. So finally one of them comes in, and I'm glassing, and I've got, they're leaning across the log. Rifle is rock solid kind of thing. And I'm glassing, and finally I realize it's an animal that I want him to take. And I'm sitting there glassing, and all of a sudden I'm breathing so heavy. Finally get this tugging on my shirt. Dad, look down at me. Daddy, are you having a heart attack? And you know what? That's the kindest heart attack there ever was. Of course, they being females, shoot that animal. The animal goes down immediately. They're a little bit excited, but they don't get excited until they start walking up, and then their knees got really wobbly, and all of a sudden they're speaking at a pitch so high that I can't understand what they're saying, kind of thing, because of excitement. Those probably, and the same thing kind of happened with my 4 grandsons and my granddaughter. They all were sitting on my lap when they shot their first animal, kind of thing. And I still get an opportunity to hunt with them every chance that they get. Right now they're busy trying to have families and, make a living and all that kind of thing. But we try to get together at least once or so a year where we can do that. But of all the memories, those are probably to me the most important out of all of them.
Wow, that's a great story. And I can see your inspiration for the Texas Wildlife Association when you see that passion, that next generation and the generation thereafter. And um, phenomenal. I guess in closing, Larry, you've put so much in to conservation, hunting. You've influenced people. People are these influencers now, and they've got these big Instagram accounts, and you're like, you've been doing this for 60 years. And so you're what I call an original influencer and the kind of guy that I want to support that kind of influencer. But let's talk a little bit about your legacy. And I know you still got lots of years ahead of you, so it's not like you're hanging up your conservation or your hunting hat anytime soon. But what do you think about when it comes to legacy and what you've created through your life and what you're leaving behind?
Interesting. To me, I think it comes right down to just a very few words. He cared about wildlife.
Mm.
What I've done over the years is, as a biologist, is try to make things better for the species that are here, and that includes humans as well too. When you get right down to it, and to hopefully that those will be perpetuated in the future, and to hopefully people will have a little bit better understanding because of some of the things that I've done that hunting really is good for the animals, and with hunting we will have animals into the future. It's like people ask me, why do you hunt? I hunt because I am. I exist. It's life to me. But I think that just the fact that a legacy is that he truly cared about wildlife and tried to make things better going into the future.
Inspirational, sir. And I can say that well, yeah, it goes without saying with your resume and all you've done in your career, if you never do another thing, that was very evident, and you've certainly made the world a better place for it. So we're certainly grateful for you, Larry. We can't thank you enough. And man, it's been an honor and a privilege to have you on the podcast. And it's so much fun. I hope we can do it again real soon because we got lots more we can talk about.
I'd love to do that, Kyle.
Well, we appreciate you, and thanks so much for being on Talk is Sheep. Thank you, Larry.
My pleasure, sir.